All right. Hello, everybody. Obviously, we started this in class. Don't know if we finished. So, um, what you should do is find the point in this video where we left off at in your notes and just finish it from there. You more than likely won't need to watch this whole video. So turn to what you need. But for those that are absent, I'm going to kind of go through it from the very beginning to so that you kind of know what you missed. Okay, so we just finished the Vietnam unit. So kind of where we're at so far in U.S. history, we've talked about basically through the Vietnam War, which is like the early part of the 1970s. So now we're going to transition now to kind of talking about really the end of the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. Guys, really the height of the Cold War at its most contentious and times during it was in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s. As you'll see here in the next couple of days, the Cold War in the 70s and 80s really began to kind of take that downhill trend where things became, we'll say, much more calmer. There still was some conflict, there still was some disagreements, and obviously we still were in the Cold War, where both sides were fighting for their ideals, as we talked about. But overall, it was a much more I don't really want to use the word peaceful, but a very, we'll say, not a whole lot of stuff that really happened. So we're going to transition to that very end of the Cold War now. All right, so some objectives. Compare, contrast how the early part of the Cold War was different from the end. Some big things that happened in the 70s and 80s at home, and obviously talking about the end of the war. All right, so our first topic is gonna be Cold War and big events in the 1970s. So kind of important if you guys kind of understand this. You have the presidents that were in the 1970s, 1980s. You have really four of them. President Nixon, as we already talked about, introduced him throughout the Vietnam unit, but he will end the Vietnam War, but unfortunately, he's not going to be able to finish his last term because of a scandal that he was involved in, as we'll talk about. So that means that President Ford, which was Nixon's vice president, will become president. He'll fill in when Nixon steps down. He will not be reelected, and we'll talk about why. And then you got President Jimmy Carter in the late 70s and early part of the 80s, and obviously President Ronald Reagan was a two-term president, Republican, that we'll talk about too. Not today, not tomorrow, but maybe towards like next week. All right, so let's start up here. Again, just kind of recapping. Again, we've already talked about this, but in 1973, President Richard Nixon is going to end the involvement of the United States in the Vietnam War. Here's a famous picture, I guess you can say, about how the last Americans that are in Vietnam are going to be flown out and taken away from Vietnam. Shortly after we leave Vietnam, the North is going to invade the South and is going to win, and they are going to unify the country under a communist flag. Our objectives was containment to stop communism from spreading, and it really didn't happen because as soon as we left, we pulled out. We didn't really meet our objective, and as soon as we left, boom, country turns communist. But anyway, Nixon did uphold his campaign promise to end and gradually start pulling the troops back home, which is what he did. Now, as we talked about ad nauseum for the past couple of weeks, as a result of the Vietnam War, the War Powers Act, so the Gulf of Tonkin, was passed. The War Powers Act was passed in 1973. What this was basically to limit the power of the president's ability to send U.S. troops into combat. During Vietnam, President Johnson basically had free reign under the Gulf of Tonkin to send troops wherever he wanted to protect U.S. interests. He used the incident in the Gulf of Tonkin to do that. And as we talked about, guys, Vietnam was not a declared war. It was an escalation by President Johnson. So because of that, Congress wanted to take precautions in the future that to basically limit the president's ability to do this. Now, basically, what it is, the president can still send troops, but he has to inform Congress. He has to explain why we're doing it, and ultimately, Congress has to give approval of it in order to keep troops there a long time, or for the long run. Um, but again, even to this very day, presidents do have the ability to send troops wherever they want. But again, there's limits on that. I believe it's 90 days, and then after that, Congress has to give approval. So, excuse me. So President Nixon, keeping on that theme, in terms of Cold War, he's going to use a policy called detente. Now, you guys at this point, hopefully you guys are doing this, copying this into your guided notes. We should be on number 3 right now. Nixon used a policy of detente to decrease Cold War tensions. So what the word detente means? It means to relax. You're gonna kind of ease up a little bit on the Cold War. Why? Well, ultimately, guys, this is kind of like a way for us to kind of simmer things down a little bit. So here's an example. Nixon is going to be the first president to visit Moscow. Moscow is the capital of the Soviet Union. So it's a big deal having a U.S. president go on Soviet soil, visit their country. That has not been done during the Cold War. So that was kind of a big deal, kind of as an olive branch, a sign of good faith, to meet face to face with Leonid Brezhnev, which was the president of the Soviet Union at the time. Also, another deal that was unprecedented is that the U.S. is going to agree to sell grain to the Soviet Union, sell food to the Soviet Union, because there was severe food shortages within the Soviet Union. So again, this is something that was not done before, where us and the Soviet Union went in trade negotiations and trade relations, but now we begin to open it up. And it's good for U.S. guys. It's good for the United States because we're selling our grain. They're buying it. So it's good for American farmers by having a trade partner. So it made sense for us to do that. The U.S. and the Soviets worked to cease fire between Israel and Arab nations. So, both sides, us and them, really helped kind of ease some of the issues that were going on in the Middle East at the time. So that's, again, a sign that we're working together on some foreign policy issues. We also agreed to start decreasing our military. Which is, again, a sign of good faith. We're not escalating, we're de-escalating. So now we can start putting money back towards other things back here at home. The U.S. is going to agree to withdraw U.S. troops from several Asian nations, again, as a sign of decreasing the military. And then also, President Nixon will also be the first president to visit China. Again, China was a communist nation, so this is showing that that he's willing to put an olive branch out there and meet with some of these communist countries and broker deals with them. Now, why China? Guys, it made sense to make a deal with China. China has over 1 billion people. That means 1 billion consumers who will buy U.S. products. So it made sense for us to establish trade relations, even though they were communist. We didn't like communists. We believe in containment, all those other things. But business-wise and trade-wise, it made sense. They can buy U.S. We can buy their products. It could be mutually beneficial to both countries. So this idea of realpolitik means common sense politics. Like you kind of put aside your feelings, and instead you focus on what's best for the United States. Well, establishing trade, establishing business relations with China and Russia made sense to start decreasing. Now, a step farther from that is that the U.S. and the Soviet Union are going to agree to this deal called SALT, the Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty. That's what it stands for, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. What that is basically we both agreed to start decreasing our nuclear programs and our nuclear weapons. Again, a sign of good faith that we're both willing to de-escalate the tensions, which was very different from what we've seen in the 50s and 60s. So again, this is the idea of realpolitik. It makes sense to do this. Instead of putting all this money towards nuclear programs, we can begin to de-escalate it and build relations with them. All right, so 1972 came the election. You have a Republican, Nixon, obviously, we talked about him. He ran for re-election again in 1972 against a Democrat, McGovern. So you can see by the vote here, it wasn't even close. Nixon is going to win by a landslide. So this is his famous picture here, coming up the plane, giving the peace sign. At this point, starting to, the whole law and order thing and starting to bring troops home. However, as you'll see right here, There's a big story that broke. It was called the Watergate scandal in 1972. So during the election, it was discovered that advisors of Nixon, so people who worked with Nixon, tried to spy on the Democrats at the Watergate apartment complex. You guys see this picture here on the left. They broke in to the Democratic headquarters and tried to wiretap and tried to steal information that they could use in the election. And ultimately, Nixon, he covered it up. He covered up the scandal. He claimed at first to not really know anything, and as more things came out, you see that other picture here. The Washington Post reporters began breaking the story and founded a connection that Nixon knew about this and began to cover it up. And this heads the Watergate scandal, hence the Watergate complex, spying on Democrats. So again, he won the election, but again, this comes out that there may have been some tampering behind it and trying to use wiretaps and things of that nature to gain access to some information of theirs. So as a result, you see Nixon here, I am not a crook. And this is a big deal. You see here, all over Newsweek, Nixon tapes that show connections to him at least knowing and covering it up. Nixon tried to get these tapes to be suppressed as presidential privilege. It's not going to work, and ultimately this brings him down, where he's going to have to step down as president. Vice president at this time. Spiro Agnew is going to resign as well. He's going to be accused of taking bribes and tax evasion. So that leads to a new vice president, Gerald Ford, who will become vice president under Nixon, who, again, after Watergate, he will be the guy who will become president. So the Watergate scandal is going to result in Nixon resigning from office in 1974. This is a picture of Nixon's resignation speech. He knows that Watergate has basically brought him down. He's going to face legal charges against this. And instead, he decides to step down from office, which will lead now President Ford to become president. So this is a picture of Gerald Ford. He's sworn in as president. Now you could probably tell by this picture down here, Ford was not a very popular president because you see this upper picture up here. President Ford is going to pardon Nixon for his crimes. Pardon means forgive, that Nixon is not going to face any jail time or any legal consequences for Watergate. So Ford is going to pardon Nixon. This is a big outrage. You got to understand, guys, this is already a time where you have the not too long ago, you had the Vietnam protests, you had civil rights protests, all these things. You already had a disconnect and a distrust of politicians and a distrust of government. Now you have the new president who's going to now pardon a crook. So this is not a good look for the government. You see this here, Ford's Nixon's getaway driver. People are mocking President Ford. And then he also will pardon a lot of the Vietnam draft dodgers who went to Canada or Mexico or anywhere else when they came back. Ford is going to pardon them too, which is also, kind of a controversial thing. So in 1976, you have Carter versus Ford. Ford is going to run for, at his own seat, and he's going to lose. So Jimmy Carter. So again, all those things I just talked about with Ford pardoning and all these things is not going to be very popular. Now you have, some issues in the Middle East. So right here you have Israel, and right here you have, Saudi Arabia, Palestine, this area, Suez Canal. Here's Egypt. So there was wars that were happening between, again, as I'll show you guys here. There was wars that were happening in Israel and a lot of these Arabic nations. That really took up a big part of time. Now, also, this is also where a lot of the oil is, guys. So here's the problem. Not really a problem, but this is what happened. So the U.S. has a strong alliance with Israel. Well, a lot of the oil producers in the world are from Arabic nations. So because we were supporting Israel, a lot of these Arabic nations were not giving us oil as a sign of protest. So there was a group called OPEC in 1973. They placed an embargo on oil imports by U.S. goods. So you see right here, down here by the map. Hey guys, the video's going to run out here, so I'm going to start a new video, so make sure you watch it.